absolutely wild as Vern Gagne's all-star wrestling goes coast to coast and continent to continent. The greatest wrestlers in the world.
He may be an apprentice carpenter, but I guarantee you he is a seasoned ring veteran.
I've been hit with bar stools, bar rags, barmaids.
I'm talking to you.
They're scared that Hulkamania's still running wild. Oh, yeah. I got a big fat wife and 9 kids at home, and I gotta feed them.
And take a look at Jesse the Body in real life.
Open your hand once if you would.
You want the stick?
This is absolutely unbelievable. Totally, completely out of control.
He's coming in over the top. Hey! Look out!
I would come in over the top rope, but then I'd have to actually get up and then sit down. And frankly, it's just too much exercise for me. My name is Chris Tubbs. I am one of the three here associated with AWA Unleashed, which is what you're listening to or you're watching. We are the preeminent podcast dedicated to telling the stories and reliving the memories of the American Wrestling Association. Okay, there's Polish Joe and there's Slick Mick. Out of the three of us, who is most likely to come over the top rope?
Boy, well, it's
or
not
off
me.
The top rope. Okay.
It is certainly not me.
It better not be me, because then we're screwed. Yes, thank you, Joe.
I can do the Andre over the top rope still.
That's because you're like 10
You're
feet
7'7" going in. I mean, it's
yeah.
You know, judging by those numbers, you guys definitely should be doing a wrestling podcast because at 6'3", I'm 10 foot tall, 7'3". Shit, I'm in Silo Sam territory. Although I guarantee you, I could do a better fucking match than Silo Sam did.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, from Rosemont, Minnesota, 7'9", 495 pounds, the big nipple, Joe Chupek.
Yeah.
The Polish power,
Yeah.
The Polish ball peen hammer.
If you're gonna throw peen in there, don't forget the other two letters. But that aside, let's get on with this week's shilling.
Let's do it. We're gonna kind of talk about something that we've done before. It was a while back, but we're gonna get to it here in a minute. But first of all, you know that we do have to do some business, so go ahead and you can fast forward to about the 5 minute and 43 second mark in 3, 2, and 1. Okay, so here's AWA Unleashed. You see right there, you got the YouTube membership exclusive perks, $4.99 a month. You get a letter and you get a magnet and you get a sticker from me, just kind of a thank you, for repping us and supporting us. You're going to get access to our live chats, which, by the way, the next one is going to be moved to the first Sunday in November. So the 27th, it's going to be, I don't know, maybe it's like the 1st or 2nd of November. I'm not exactly sure what the
Third.
The 3rd. Okay. I was close. Oh, that's right. Because the election day is the 5th. So yeah, go back 2 days to 3rd. So that's going to be our next live chat. You get access to the podcast a day early. So if you're looking at this on Tuesday, you can get it on Monday. Some people like it, some people don't. People that have it early obviously like it because they pay for it. You get access to our live chats, which I think is super duper fun. We enjoy doing it. And you get exclusive interviews. We've had James Beard. We've had Ken Anderson. We've had Herb Simmons. We've had a bunch of things. Plus you get a picture of a pack of pictures from Mick Arch as part of that. Did I get that all right?
Make sure they're not a pack of pictures of Mick Karch.
No, not a pack of peen pictures from Mick Karch.
Are you guys done? Bert and
Oh,
Ernie,
God, no. We still got about 55 minutes to go, Mick.
Yeah, and by the way, I've still got a little less than a minute to promote T-Public because I do have to hit the 5:43 mark. Let's see if I can actually hit my mark, as they say. I'm going to put it on the screen as well. Bottom, we have brand new AWA Unleashed merchandise. You can see Mick, he's repping the hat. Proof that we do have hats. I do have my Slick Mitt cup, but I was using it over the weekend, and frankly, I was too lazy to do dishes, and I didn't feel like loading the dishwasher, so that's why it's not clean. I could use it again, but, bacteria and not wanting to get sick and all that stuff. But we have cups, we have hats, we have stickers, we have like hoodies, we have a whole bunch of different things. So again, tpublic.com, AWA Unleashed merchandise. We have Slick Mick merchandise. It's a lot of fun. Definitely represent us with that because you love the brand in 3, 2, 1. All right. Are we ready to move on to the actual subject? How was that?
You hit that mark, man. You're good.
See?
You should do like radio or something.
I know, right? All right. Well, if it's okay with you, let's go ahead and cruise into our topic.
Crispy.
Crunchy?
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought we were playing password.
Oh no. That'd be too brutal.
All right.
Hello, Sam.
As I said, we are going to cruise into our topic. What a fucking bag of dicks that bag.
Well,
of dicks
we got to cover the 3-state promotion. We got a lot of work to do here.
That's right. Eat a bag of dicks, you dick eater. All right, let's
Hold
let's
on.
go ahead.
Are you
Yes.
talking about somebody besides the troll that we had to get rid of?
I'm
Is
saying
that
nothing.
the same? Or is that the same troll?
My hands are clean.
It
They
wasn't
are-
an open fist. No. Clean.
Open hand, referee. Open hand.
Referee. Okay, speaking of referees, let's get into it. Thank you for those that got that, and again, let's cruise into our topic. Okay.
Yes.
Referees, guys. We did a show about referees, but we did it, I want to say about 2.5 years ago. So Joe wasn't a part of it, but one thing I do want to do is I kind of want to get into it in the sense that they're more important now than I think maybe people realize. So I just want to ask you guys, before we get into the actual names on this, what is the role of the referee and why are they so important? Mick, I'm going to let you go, and then you and Joe just kind of kick it around for a bit.
Referees have always been important, but in this day and age of television and premium live events and what have you, when they have that earpiece in and they're getting their instructions from the back, from the board in the back, they're basically calling a lot. I mean, they're telling the guys when to go into a commercial break. They're telling the guys when to take it home. Everything. The referee used to be kind of a non-entity until the finish. They would just, they would just be there and do their job and count the pins or whatever else. But when it came to the finish, whether it was a Marty Miller or whoever, they were integral. And in this day and age, as I said, the importance of the referee can't be overstated. Joe and I come from an era when guys were going into the finish, maybe the timekeeper at ringside would take the pencil from behind his ear and put it on the desk in front of him. And that signaled the referee to tell the boys to take it home. Nowadays, modern technology, you got the earpiece in and they're getting all their instructions. And a lot of times the referee is as important as the wrestlers in the scheme of things.
Well, I got to add one thing to that. The importance of the referee today versus our day, Mick, is certainly for the well-being also of the wrestlers. Yeah. The level of danger that they subject themselves to with these high-risk moves. They'll go over and have the wrestler squeeze their hand or not squeeze their hand, depending on whether they're injured or not. Back in our day, Mick, yes, injuries happened, but not to a small fraction of what is going on today. Back in the day, you know, a bombs away or maybe a pile driver might have been the worst thing, or if a guy blew out his knee going into the ropes. But today, falling off the top of cages, and you've got ladders and chairs and dogs, oh my. So they're a much more integral part, but as I've always said, and when I talk to referees that I work with in the indies nowadays, your job is to not be a part of the match during the match. So in other words, don't make yourself obvious. You got to stay in the back with the, you know, for the camera angles. You got to be aware of where the cameras are. In the day, you know, not so much. Those referees, it was a much simpler approach to policing a wrestling match.
So I was just going to ask, when you guys are talking about like getting the signals from outside, I get a couple things. One of them I want to ask maybe before we get into the name, but does it take away from the wanting to portray it as a competition when you've got somebody who's getting their cues in their ear, you know, more so than just having it be this organic, like calling it on the fly sort of match? This event, does it diminish what we're seeing in the ring because you're being told everything through an earpiece?
In terms of the spontaneity, maybe, but everything is so controlled now. I mean, down to the minute, especially for a television product. If you know, you got 7 minutes to do this match.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the referee, if he's not looking at the timekeeper like he would back in the old days for the pencil behind the ear, then he's going to miss the time cue. Nowadays, he can't miss anything because you got somebody babbling in his ear and say, hey, take it home. We're going, tell him to rest for a minute, 2-minute commercial break, whatever. I don't know if it detracts from an overall presentation standpoint. I guess if I'm a referee, it might drive me a little crazy to hear this constant babble.
Because we know it's entertainment, right? We know it's
Right.
not a real contest. We know what it is. So maybe we're just more accepting of it now that, okay, we know that it's all part of the show, and it's not like they're doing this and it's a real competition, whereas the referees just kind of, you know, off in La La Land.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point. But again, referee, whether it's the third man or the third woman or whoever it might be, as we said, very integral when it's time.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to overstep your role. I would hate to point to Aubrey Edwards in AEW, but I think every once in a while she kind of takes center stage,
Mm-hmm.
and that's not the job of a referee.
I will say this about the one thing about referees, whether it was old school or today, a referee's 10 count is the longest 30 seconds in the history of time.
Oh my God, yes.
1, 2. You know, going by that count, Mick Karch would last 5 minutes.
Well, or they're like, they do it and then they look and they're like, oh damn, what number was I? I guess I gotta start over. 1, 2. What? I looked. Oh, squirrel. Wait, what? 1, 2, and it's like, for the love of God, just count to 10.
There
it's not that hard.
No such thing as a cadence in referee school. And like Joe said, 1, 2. It's just,
And
you know, and maybe
just like I want a referee to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Done.
Maybe they got the guy in the earpiece too, saying, slow down your count, speed up your count a little bit. Who knows? But at any rate, let's give these guys their due. The guys from back in the day.
And again, the referees are a part of the match. I was going to say show, but I'm still going to go back to old school. They're an integral part of every match. Some matches more so than others, but they're still an important part.
All right, one last question that I do have before we get into the names. I think the perception, and this kind of leads into what we're going to be talking with the names. I think the perception used to be that referees were people that couldn't make it as wrestlers. Oh, you can't be a wrestler, but you know what? Maybe you can be a referee. I think the people that we're going to see on this, we have a nice mix of individuals that can be referees, but that also had a pretty good career doing other things other than just being I mean, was there a perception that if you can't be a wrestler, then you might as well be a referee because you're not good enough?
I think what it was is they wanted to differentiate between an average referee and a referee who was going to be a no-nonsense guy. So a no-nonsense guy probably was a wrestler or training to be a wrestler. Otherwise, you had your Marty Millers of the world, that were just, 4'7", fire hydrants with legs. We got a good mix, and you'll see the difference on this list.
How did you guys decide who was on this list?
It was more my call than Joe's, and there's some names on there that people aren't going to recognize from back in the AWA days, but there are going to be some that were brought in as special referees or enforcers or troubleshooting referees, what have you. I think these names, for the most part, though, are going to be pretty familiar to the fans of the AWA, even going into the 80s. Some go farther back than that, but you'll recognize a good number of them.
When I hear somebody say or announce an enforcer referee, that's also a signal for they're going to fuck with the match. Somehow or another, they're going to get involved. But enough said. Let's get into our very first referee. Chris, put up number 1, if you would, please.
Where is he? Where is the dynamic first referee?
Well,
as we wait for that, I wonder if
hold on. I just wanted to make sure I had the right one because I've got a few. I want to make sure that I've got the right one here. Okay.
Live podcasting.
Yeah, I mean, hey,
sometimes it gets brutal. Sometimes
sometimes
this is why we suck, guys.
Yeah,
this is why we suck and why we're losers. All right, let's
people have left already.
Yeah, let's cruise into this first one.
There we go.
Is that right?
That's right.
I'm not a loser. I'm a winner. I'm a winner.
This gentleman right here. He didn't have the beard when he was refereing for the AWA, and he, of course, wasn't in the ring in wrestling trunks, but that's Joe Snider. And Joe was one of those old-time carny guys that ingratiated himself to the Minneapolis Boxing and Wrestling Club. Back in the day, Joe Snider as a referee was probably, I would say he preceded Marty Miller as the guy that was the go-to guy almost every show in the Twin Cities area. There was another guy named Joe Valento, but Joe Snider, who actually was a light heavyweight wrestler in his day, came in not too many screw job finishes with Joe Snider. Pretty nondescript guy, as you said, Chris. He would just he'd be there, and he knew his role. Go in there and count to 3. And Joe Snider, for those fans, especially in the 1960s and early 1970s, Joe Snider was a mainstay referee in the AWA.
It looks like an Amish leprechaun. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just with.
Do you know how many Amish leprechauns you just alienated?
None.
Hey, we're really over in the Amish community, okay, guys?
We certainly are. Yeah,
I've seen the demographics.
Yeah, there he is. There's our buddy. That is none other than our old pal Bill Crouch, and that picture of Bill was when he was actually wrestling in the southern part of the United States as Butch Malone. But Bill was a referee here in the AWA in the 1970s, did wrestling and refereeing. And by the way, I want to add this too. There's going to be some guys that are not going to be mentioned on this program that wrestled and refereed simultaneously, especially back in the 70s, AWA, when they were traveling city to city. We are not denigrating them. We're not ignoring them. We just, as a time constraint, we wanted to put together a pretty familiar list. But Bill Crouch, big tough guy. I believe he trained with Dick the Bruiser, as a matter of fact, in the Chicago area before he came into the Twin Cities. Great guy. We love Bill Crouch. And, of course, a mainstay preliminary wrestler here in the AWA.
Before we get into the next one of the things, and we've lightly touched about and mentioned it on other podcasts. Back in the day, it was very oftentimes you'd go through the wrestling camp, and then you'd work your way up to being a wrestler. So you'd go from wrestling camp to setting up the ring to being a referee, then probably doing a job or two. Then you got onto the card somehow or another.
And so setting up and tearing down the ring, you did it all. You paid your dues.
Exactly.
Up to and including Greg Gagne.
Exactly.
Everybody went through the drill.
Yeah, just wanted to add that little tidbit in there. Let's move on to the next guy, who the boys would also always refer to him as the human ice scraper.
Oh, not nice.
That's not a shot. That's what they would refer to him as.
I get it. I get it. And the fans at the St. Paul Civic Center would always yell number, 2 when he would give the 2 count. Because he had to use both hands for the 3 count. That's our old buddy, the Iron Duke, Jim Mitchell. And haven't seen Jim in many, many years. I hope he's doing well. The last I heard, he was up in the Forest Lake, Minnesota area. I don't know if he's still around, but Jim Mitchell, the Iron Duke, also a guy who refereed and wrestled and set up and tore down the ring, did it all. And he was another one of the mainstays here in the AWA. I mentioned before with Jim Mitchell, there's an old Georgia Championship Wrestling clip out on YouTube. And I forget the year and I forget the exact wrestlers that were in the ring. But Jim did a run-in as a masked man, as a heel in Georgia Championship Wrestling on TV, and helped to beat up one of the baby faces. So he wasn't just the Iron Duke. He was big-time stuff. Great friend, worked with him in his NCWA promotion. And Iron Duke, legendary in the AWA.
And by the way, I just want to clarify, I'm not making fun of Jim's disability, okay? Jim was a good referee. He was a good worker. Didn't really get to know him as close as I think Mick did. But Jim did have. He was missing his 3 middle fingers. Yeah. So I'm just. Back in the day, the boys could be cruel, and I was just referring to what they would call him.
Well, and they called him the Iron Duke because he had a glove on his hand. And so certainly it was no secret why they called him the Iron Duke, and everybody knew it. And Jim took it in stride. Big, tough guy, but a great guy nonetheless, Jim Mitchell.
Yep. Going to move on to the next one, who has some familial ties to somebody that Mick and I were close with.
Aha. There he is, the astute, the erudite, Bob Warren, a.k.a. Bob Bockwinkel. That is Nick's brother, Bob. And, of course, when he was working in the AWA in the 1980s, they never said this is Bob Bockwinkel. The internet was not explosive at the time, so not a lot of people knew. Some people knew, but obviously you didn't want to make the connection, especially when Nick was working heel here in the AWA. Bob was a great guy. Had a chance to work with him at the Showboat, referee Bob Warren. And a couple of years ago, they actually did a tribute to Nick at Cauliflower Alley Club with Bob and Nick's widow, Darlene. accepting an award on Nick's behalf. So great guy, and did an excellent job as a referee in the AWA.
Question for you, Mick. When I started October of '85, the rag sheets were already being published. When did those start? Because those are like the early version of the internet leaking stuff out to fans. Can you remember when approximately when the first rag sheet came out?
I don't know the exact time that it came out, but I'm going to say about 84-ish,
Okay.
83-ish, because I remember Dave Meltzer and the Wrestling Observer did a big deal on Bruiser Brody when Bruiser was killed in Puerto Rico. So it was about that time, I think, that they started to explode a little bit. Wade Keller and the Pro Wrestling Torch was a couple of years later, about 1987-ish. So I think Meltzer was probably, the guy who debuted this new form of wrestling journalism, as it were. But I'd say that's a pretty close guess.
Okay. Moving on to our next zebra on the list, number 5. This guy, I never worked with him. Yes, I'm trying to kill time. But he had to be late 60s, early 70s?
Late 60s, early 70s is absolutely right. That is Chuck Svensson, Svensson. And there he's seen refereeing a match between Wilbur Snider on the left and our friend Nick Bockwinkel. Chuck was another mainstay referee here in the AWA, refereed consistently. He was atypical in the sense that he was a big guy. He was probably about 6'3", 6'4" himself, so he wasn't your average referee. Did a great job, and he was a no-nonsense referee, but he was kind of nondescript. Not a lot of screw job finishes with Chuck Svensson. I got to tell you, outside of the ring, one of the nicest guys I ever met in the wrestling business. Always fan-friendly. Chuck, here's a little aside. Back when Dusty Rhodes and Dick Murdoch wrestled Nick Bockwinkel and Ray Stevens in Minneapolis, and there was a full-scale riot with fans coming into the ring, and an off-duty officer was stabbed in the melee. Chuck Svensson, the referee, was helping all the boys toss the fans out of the ring, the ones that got out of hand. Chuck had the size and the ability to do it, and again, great guy. One of the nicest guys you ever want to meet. Chuck Svensson.
An interesting aside on the whole, the size of the referee. Having a guy 6'3", I can't imagine Vern would have put Chuck into a match as a referee, let's say against Mad Dog and Crusher.
Right.
Because they were not exactly, they weren't 6-footers. So to have a referee's head here and then, Mad Dog here and Crusher here sort of falls under the same thing of the wrestling announcer.
Yes.
That's why Marty O'Neill fits so well. He was so short, made the boys look bigger. Same with Mean Gene Okerlund. When Larry Nelson was on camera, Larry would spread his legs out so that he would be shorter. And they all, your job as an on-air interviewer was to stand behind, let the wrestlers be in front so that they look bigger than they are. So just a little bit.
Yeah, Roger Kent was another guy. Roger was a big man, and he would stand behind too. Sometimes he actually sat down for interviews, to kind of avoid bringing the spotlight on his size as well. Good point, Joe.
Okay. Next guy, this is going to be somebody that you recognize from his ring work.
Kroo
Vaziri, better known as the Iron Sheik. And I can't do a great imitation of it, but I'll do it anyway. Hulk Hogan.
That is, that's a very good imitation. Needless to say, he didn't referee in this garb. When he broke into the business and came over from Iran with every accolade an amateur wrestler could get, Kroo Vaziri went through Vern Gagne's training camp, and as you said earlier on, Joe, paid the dues. Unless you were a megastar, a la a guy like Chris Taylor was purported to be when he got in, you paid your dues, you refereed, you set up and tore down the ring, whatever. And Kroo Vaziri was no different. And it's so interesting that the babyface kind of milquetoast Kroo Vaziri of back in the early 1970s turned out to be one of the most famous wrestlers, heels, and then beloved wrestling characters that ever lived, Kroo Vaziri.
He's a part of pop culture, which you think about it, I would not have thought that in 2024, we would have thought about this man being a revered wrestling personality. It just shows how you get past the character and you get to the person.
He's one of these guys that transcended,
Yes.
just the wrestling business, and he was a character. I knew Kaz very well, and let me tell you that as his personality, as the Iron Sheik developed, so did his confidence and his interaction with people, and his "I don't give a shit" attitude kind of spiraled out of control after a while. But yeah, Kroo Vaziri, one of the early regular referees here when he first broke in, early 1970s.
Well, as far as the not giving a shit attitude, I'll sort of apply that to as we get older, or as people get older. I know for myself, I give less of a shit what other people think or say than I did 20 years ago. Hell, I got the flippin' librarian eye strings on because I don't want to lose my glasses. Anyway.
You're right. Yeah, who cares? And everybody, you'll get there. If you're not old enough, you'll get there. You'll understand someday. Next referee.
Yes. So this next guy, he actually was a part of some AWA stuff when I was there in the mid to late 80s. This is none other than Joe Blanchard.
Joe Blanchard, the father of Tully Blanchard. Joe Blanchard was one of those guys. He was a friend of Vern Gagne's. He was a great amateur wrestler. I believe Joe also went to that famous West Texas state, if I'm not mistaken, that spawned so many great professional wrestlers back in the day. Joe was a good friend of Vern's. He wrestled, of course, extensively in the NWA in the Texas area, but he was one of the troubleshooters. Vern would say, or, they'd come on television and say, we're going to bring in a guy that can handle business. He's a no-nonsense guy, and if these guys get out of hand, well, by God, we got the law and order man. Joe Blanchard to come in and referee. And you knew if Blanchard was coming in, as you said earlier on, Joe, something was in the air if you're bringing in a guy like Joe Blanchard.
And nothing better than when the referee would get into the face of a heel during the match, the pop that they would get, the classic. I mean, stuff, I think it would still happen today, but I'm trying to think of like the last real good referee angle that professional wrestling has had. And I'm talking for an extended run, more than just in one match. It's not the same as it used to be, because the referees today, they are just referees. And I don't mean to belittle that part of it, but as we talked about, the guys would train, set up the ring, they would referee. So it's a different perspective for referees today than it was back in the day. I'll leave it at that.
To your point, if you think back on it, some of the famous referee angles that were extended, Danny Davis in New York, WWF as a referee. The Hebners, when they did that, double twin referee angle. Nick Patrick in WCW.
I was just going to say the Nick Patrick thing when he did the whole NWO, but it took him a bit to do it. So
it did, but he was great at it. I mean, once he got his feet wet. But yeah, for the most part, you don't see referees getting involved in any kind of extended angle. Maybe in a screw job finish once in a while, but nothing on long term.
Yeah. So our next guy, I have to admit, I never have heard of this guy?
That's Sergeant Slaughter. Oh, you mean the other guy. That is Merv Hunger. And Merv is our good buddy up in Canada. And he was involved with the AWA in the 1970s and 1980s, did a lot of refereeing up in the Winnipeg area for the AWA. I believe he had some kind of a political position up in Canada. Not quite sure what that was, but, he made his name outside of wrestling in that area. Merv was another one of these guys. He wasn't a big, strong, tough-looking referee. He was your average-looking guy. But every once in a while, they would call him an enforcer, a troubleshooting referee. Probably because the fans weren't used to seeing him, and he was coming in from Canada, which already labeled him as a troubleshooter. But Merv Hunger, great guy, follows us on Facebook, and a regular again. And I'm sure, he and Al DeRusha refereed a lot of matches together or, on the same show up in Winnipeg. Merv Hunger, who wants to be on our podcast, by the way.
Oh, bring him on.
Yeah, I'd love to have him on.
Yep, good guy, Merv.
Awesome. Let's make it happen.
Okay, our next guy,
someone who is not quite as revered, shall we say?
I don't want to go that far, but
I, as much as I hate to denigrate this guy because Bockwinkel was a great friend of Lord James Blears. Joe, from the commentary table at the Showboat, Lord James Blears, he enjoyed going on Full Throttle and kind of running over Rod Trongard. And, of course, here in the AWA, infamous for the Hulk Hogan, Nick Bockwinkel screw job finish where 19,000 screaming people thought that Hogan had won the championship only to have it reversed. Lord Blears took one of the great swan dive bumps in wrestling history in this match. He was a great wrestler back in the day. Lord Blears, he was from Hawaii, I believe. His daughter was a beautiful gal, a surfer, Laura Blears. And he was, as I said, he was great friends with Nick. I'm not sure if that was the connection to bring him into the AWA. But back in his day, he was a pretty solid wrestler, and he would main event a lot of shows around the country and into Canada and Hawaii. And, here in the AWA, his claim to fame, that infamous screw job finish.
And of course, there's Stanley Blackburn to his left, our right behind Hulk Hogan. The whole James Blears thing, beyond the whole refereeing and this angle, I forgot what match it was, but there could have been a match between Lord James Blears and Rod Trongard on the mic. Rod, as I've said before, loved Rod. Great guy, nice guy, fantastic voice, a voice made for radio. And the difference between radio and television is, at least on television, if you take a pause, or on video, you take a pause, there's still something to distract you. But if you're listening to somebody on the radio and there's silence, it's like, oh shit, did the tower go out? Did they go off the air or whatever? So Rod brought that in. So you combine that with Lord James Blears, who could ramble on multiple times more and worse than I can ramble on, you often got this little combative situation, shall we say.
Lord James Blears, who talked like he was vaccinated with a phonograph needle, and the match was Jimmy Snuka.
And De Beers.
Jimmy Snuka and De Beers. That was the match that Lord James kind of took over, and Rod didn't like it. Let's move ahead.
We're going to go to the junkyard for the next one. No, not the junkyard dog. I should be more specific and say we're going to go to the scrapyard.
There
George Scrapyongadaski.
George Gadaski, one of the most beloved figures in the AWA, not only as a wrestler and a very accomplished one, but of course as a referee. They got him involved in that angle with the Crusher and Lord Alfred Hayes, Gadzuki, as he was called. George was the hardest working man in the wrestling business, I'm telling you. So many times I would see him after a show and he would say, yeah, I wrestled and then I refereed and then I drove the truck from Minneapolis to Omaha. And then I had to drive it back to Winnipeg. And then I set up the ring and tore down the ring. This guy was such a hardworking, dedicated guy. And he always felt that he was underappreciated by the AWA front office. I don't know if that was the case. I don't think so. I know that Wally thought the world of George Scrap Iron Gadaski, as we all did. Great guy, left us much too soon. I believe he was 52, 53 years old when he passed away.
Well, you can't say George Scrap Iron Gadaski without thinking of our next referee. Dear friend to both of us, Mick, we're talking about the Sodbuster, Kenny J.
Like George Gadaski, and you really can't. They're separate. They're locked at the hip, I should say, Joe. In wrestling memory in the AWA, both as wrestlers and as referees. Fans, yes, I remember Kenny J and George Gadaski. They never won a match on television. Well, first of all, that's not true. Secondly, that's how damn good they were in their role. They became legends in their own way, beloved by the fans in the AWA. And Kenny and George, again, two guys that would do pretty much anything the wrestling office asked them to do. Kenny refereed an awful lot of matches here in the AWA, as did George. He had that infamous exhibition with Muhammad Ali in Chicago. Kenny J, I said it, I'll say it again. Nicest guy I ever met, ever, in the wrestling business. Dedicated to charities, loved his fans, loved his family, sorely missed Sodbuster Kenny J.
Our next referee is actually, another familial tie. We're talking about the son of the one, the only, the Crusher, Larry Lasowski, right in the middle. That's a great pick in front of the Crusher statue in South Milwaukee.
That is a picture from Crusher Fest a few years ago. And, sad to say, Kenny J, of course, has left us. But Larry Lasowski, I don't know how often people they made the direct connection between the Crusher and Larry Lasowski when he came into referee. I don't think they actually said this is the Crusher's son, although everybody knew it, the Lasowski name. And look at that face. My God, talk about, you think that guy's the Crusher's son? No kidding. Larry Lasowski, again, one of these guys, kind of a troubleshooting referee, always gave a great account of himself. Never understood why Larry didn't actually get into the wrestling end of it as opposed to refereeing, but he was a damn good one. And another guy that I would love to get on our podcast. I would love that.
Looking at that pic, you could say that the glass doesn't fall far from the keg.
There you go. Perfect.
Now, the next guy on our list, I saw the photo before. This has got to be one of my all-time favorite wrestling photos.
This is such a great photo. This might be the best picture in the history of wrestling.
Did you take this one, Mick?
I did not. Our friend Karen Melvin, actually, she was an AWA photographer. She took this one. And I believe the tag match was Nick Bockwinkel and Mr. Saito against the Hennigs. And things are getting out of hand. Nick has a chair. Larry has a chair. And referee Eddie Sharkey, ladies and gentlemen, our old pal Eddie, is getting the fuck out of Dodge as best as he can because he's about to be sandwiched between two steel folding chairs. And
well, look at how Larry's got that chair. Larry's like that, and Nick's like, "Oh shit, how am I going to stop this?" And Eddie's like, "Going."
Oh, absolutely. Larry's holding the chair. You ask any wrestler who takes a chair shot, Larry, you don't hold it that way, for God's sakes. You're gonna shish kebab Nick Bockwinkel.
And everybody's like, Eddie, like, referee, it's the other way. He's like,
oh
nah,
my
good.
God. And I'm sure that Eddie is signaling for the bell at this point. I think things probably got out of hand. But Eddie Sharkey again. Eddie did not work for the AWA for a long time.
His feet aren't even on the mat. Like, both of his
no.
feet are off the mat.
That's right. Oh, yeah. What a great call, Chris. Look at him. Eddie is actually airborne there. And oh, my God. What a terrific shot. This captures the essence of old school wrestling. Eddie Sharkey, wrestler back in the day, and a good one in the 1950s, 1960s. And Eddie, of course, had a falling out with Vern Gagne and didn't come back to the AWA until about 1984. He was gone for a long time. And he came back because he was able to provide Vern with the Road Warriors. So Vern kind of, swallowed his pride a little bit and put Eddie back to work. And judging by that shot, that picture, you wonder if Eddie regretted coming back to work at the AWA. God love Eddie Sharkey. Oh, man. One of my favorite people in the business, still alive and kicking, Eddie Sharkey.
We've talked about enforcer referees, and our next one is a guy who could sort of back it up with being an enforcer, the only man to fight 7 world heavyweight champions in professional boxing, none other than Scott Ledoux. Scott
Ledoux, the late Scott Ledoux, the owner of Jukebox Saturday Night, the site that the Midnight Rockers were tossed out of many, many times. Scott, again, a troubleshooting referee, and they got him involved in the angle with Larry Zbyszko back about Wrestle Rock time. And Scott was a tough guy, and he delivered one of the best work punches to Larry Zbyszko I've ever seen. Larry sold it like he was shot out of a cannon. It was a great feud. And, of course, Scott was one of the highlights of the Wrestle Rock Rumble when he was going to smack the little shit. Larry Zbyszko. Scott, again, great friend of Vern Gagne's, great friend of the AWA, legendary, beloved here in the state of Minnesota, troubleshooting referee.
Scott was fun to work with. He was, at least to me, he was kind, considerate. Always said hi to me. Always said hi, Polish Joe. I don't understand why he gets the bad rap. Maybe because he came across as maybe a little over the top. When he was refereeing. But anyway,
that's the only one that I remember from my days, the troubleshooting referee. But I mean, I looked at Scott Ledoux, and one thing about him, like you talk about the legitimacy, I really felt like he could kick the shit out of anybody in the ring, and that he was the one guy you don't mess with. I mean, I don't remember a lot of the other ones, but he was the one that stood out. Like, I thought he was he could have killed Larry Zbyszko if he wanted to.
Oh, my God. Yeah, you talk about troubleshooting referee, and then you look at Scott Ledoux, man, built like a brick shit house. And Scott could handle himself, believe me. And, he had the credibility. And, again, legendary in the state of Minnesota. They just ate him up.
Our next referee, we're going to go to the bench for our next guy. Excuse me. None other than bench warmer Bob Lzma.
We mentioned bench warmer Bob on a recent podcast. Again, another one of the Minnesota sports celebrities, rode the bench for the Minnesota Vikings. Of course, went into TV commercials and what have you, kind of a parody of himself. Bench warmer was, every man. Everybody loved Bob Lzma, just your regular guy. And they inserted Bob as a referee, and he got into a feud with the Mike Enos and Wayne Bloom, the Destruction Crew. That was his claim to fame. And I've mentioned this before. Bob, at one point, I don't think the fans were buying the Bob character. I don't remember if he got involved in a football style match with somebody and, put the helmet on. I think he did. But the fans weren't buying it, and they booed him in his native Minnesota at the St. Paul Civic Center. And on his way back to the locker room, the old kindly bench warmer flipped off the crowd. And I think shortly after that, that was about the extent of Bob Lzma's professional wrestling connection. But fun guy.
I think the football quote unquote match that you were talking about is part of the ill-fated Team Challenge series.
No.
I think wasn't that part of like a Rochester taping or something?
Yeah,
I don't know, for something that it kind of, that was, well, and the thing is, like, Bob Lzma in the outside of the wrestling business, people like loved him. Like, people loved the bench warmer Bob, and he embraced that. But then you get him into something else. It's like, well, he's not good enough to be a pro football player. He doesn't play, but yet he's going to be this enforcer. Like, how can we take him seriously? He's such an awful football player. And I mean,
and Vern was going on that Minnesota connection.
Yeah.
He loved those guys from other sports that were legendary in the state. So,
and don't get me wrong, like, to be a pro football player, you still got to be really good.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just, I think it didn't translate over to wrestling.
But you got to add into that, Chris, as far as Lzma goes.
Mm-hmm.
Look at who he was backing up. The Purple People Eaters.
Right.
I mean, there's not many people that could have cracked that defensive line.
That's true.
So, but the fact that Bob Lzma was a professional football player, bench or not, he was still an incredible athlete.
Well, they probably would have had a Super Bowl if Bob Lzma would have played.
I agree with you.
Our next guy now, when I hear referees in the AWA, Marty Miller is the first guy that pops into my mind.
I'm going to take credit for this photograph. I took that at ringside, and that was when the Crusher came back in the mid-1980s and feuded with Jerry Blackwell across the AWA. But Marty Miller, I think, is the definitive AWA referee. We've talked about this and Marty so many times. He was all of about 5'6", 5'7", maybe. And I think that was about, his width too, back in the day. Marty was, he was quite a guy. And Marty himself, I've said this many times, when he came out to referee a match, especially a main event, instantly, and this is Marty Miller's quote, he says, everybody in the audience knew it was going to be a fuck finish. As soon as they saw Marty Miller, they knew something was a little bit amiss.
Did they look forward to the fuck finishes, the schmazzes, or did they just did they want a clean finish? Because sometimes people like the chaos.
Back in the day, Chris, I think they wanted a clean finish, and when Marty, they were believers. And when Marty Miller came out, and they thought maybe things aren't going to go so well for our baby face here, they didn't like Marty. They got all over him. God bless Marty Miller. Again, I think the definitive referee in the AWA, and Marty forgave me all those years later when Dr. X first came into the AWA and could not make an appearance. He was supposed to be sitting in the audience, scouting Vern Gagne before anybody knew who Dr. X was. Dr. X could not make it. They put Marty Miller in a mask and put shoulder pads on him and a suit jacket, and sat Marty in the front row at the AWA TV tapings, and some smart mouth punk kid.
Does it rhyme with Rick Blarch?
Yeah, something like that. Turned around and said, "Hey, Marty Miller." Well, that did not go over well, not only with the hierarchy in the AWA, but Marty, he would have hung me up he would have wrapped my tongue around my throat and hung me. But over the years, I got to know Marty very well. Great guy. And unfortunately, Marty was very diabetic. So it got to the point, it was almost kind of a running joke. The blind referee, Marty was having sight problems because of the diabetes, and it eventually took his life. But there's your AWA referee for all time, Marty Miller.
I can't get over Marty Miller dressed as Dr. X. The first thing that popped into my mind is it would have been a lowercase x instead of a capital X.
Not only that,
Oh,
a couple
well
of weeks
done, Joe.
later,
Well done.
they actually put Marty Miller in the ring as a wrestler against Dr. X on television. And I don't know why they did that. Nobody knew other than, me shooting my mouth off to the, fans in attendance. But Marty Miller went in and did a quick job for Dick Beyer, Dr. X, and his figure 4 leg lock. So Marty had a stint as a wrestler as well.
While Marty Miller could never be classified as an enforcer referee, our next guy could certainly fit into that category. Is that hair on Baron?
What?
Yeah, there you
That's
go.
Yeah, that's hair. I thought it was a shadow.
No, that is a little bit of fuzz on the Baron's hair. That is not too far out of University of Nebraska. Rashki from Nebraska. That's our buddy Jim Rashki, Baron von Rashki. I'm going to say this picture goes back to 1965, 66, somewhere in there, when Baron was first getting involved in the wrestling business as a rookie. But again, another one of these guys. Here you got a standout amateur wrestler. And I mean, the Baron was the real deal at the University of Nebraska. Trained under Vern Gagne, of course, eventually, with the help of Mad Dog Vachon, turned from Jim Rashki to the Baron von Rashki. But another one who paid his dues early on in his career. He did it all, as did the other guys. Set up the ring, tear down the ring, drive the ring truck, referee. So if you, unfortunately, the tapes are not there anymore. The films aren't there anymore. But if you look back on 1960s AWA, you'll see referee Jim Rashki.
It doesn't look, yes, it looks like Baron, but it doesn't look like the Baron that I know. I mean, look at the legs on him.
Oh,
The definition, the thickness of him. Baron in his later days was not so much like that. We'll just put it that way.
correcto. Moving on.
Moving on. So our next, we got two guys in the next photo, and they both were referees. My dear close friends, Al and Gary Daria.
Let's start with Al. Al refereed occasionally here in the state of Minnesota. He did refereeing up in the Winnipeg area a lot. Al Daria, we've extolled Al's virtues many, many times. He wore every conceivable hat outside of being a wrestler himself in the AWA. Referee, announcer, TV producer, you name it. Al Daria deserves to be in the Minnesota Broadcasting Hall of Fame. He is. And we know Al is facing some serious health issues. So we always send our best to Al Daria. His son, Gary, back in the 1980s, Juice Daria. Gary was another guy. I don't know that there were too many better referees than Gary Daria in terms of just the knowledge of what to do in the ring, where to position himself, how to get everything over. Gary was a damn good referee and probably as busy as anybody in the referee circles back in the Showboat days.
My laughter as you were talking about it, it's not that I'm disagreeing with what you just said about Gary. He was, in fact, if not the best, one of the best referees in all of professional wrestling. My laughter goes with you're talking about how Gary always knew where to be. Well, that applied for the camera as well. Juice loved to get his face on camera, would always make sure that if he's raising up somebody's hand, that he was close enough to them so that we couldn't zoom into a close-up of just the wrestler. You had to get Gary into the shot. But yeah, great wrestler, great friend. We had a great couple of hours with Al and Juice about a year ago. Would love to get, I don't think we'll be able to get Al back on, but we'll see if we can get Juice back on maybe for a future episode. Our last one.
Oh,
Yeah. This falls into the whole tying into the local celebrity phase that Vern Gagne liked to do. And this is another guy, Gary Lumpkin. Just people are going, huh? It just didn't fit.
Gary Lumpkin was a TV personality of sorts on a local level. I believe he actually his broadcasting career and his TV career really kind of blossomed after he left KSTP, excuse me, Channel 5 here in the Twin Cities. But he had a very popular afternoon talk show, kind of had that comedic personality about him. And Vern, again, going to the local celebrities, as you said, Joe, went to Gary Lumpkin to bring him in to referee a women's match in the Twin Cities. Well, sad to say for Gary Lumpkin, Gary was in the ring with Sherry Martel, and I forget who Sherry's opponent was, and I don't want to misspeak. But Gary was not really smartened up to all the intricacies of professional wrestling. You talk about where to be in the ring and what have you. And to be honest with you, he blew a couple of spots. Well, I don't think that Sherry Martel knew that Gary had not been smartened up. And sad to say, the match wasn't very good, and there were a lot of blown spots. And on the way back to the locker room, as I have said many times, Sherry, in her fit of rage, and Sherry had a little bit of a temper. We both know that. Mr. Lumpkin's arm, his forearm got a little bit too close to Sherry Martel's teeth. And Sherry sunk her choppers into the arm of Gary Lumpkin. I saw it. I was, 2 feet away from it when it happened. And there was no work bite here. This was a shoot bite. And poor Gary Lumpkin, thank God she didn't clamp on and not let go. But yet, and Sherry said to me after, and this is her quote, "Why the fuck don't they get smartened up before they get into the ring?" So Gary Lumpkin, as far as I know, one and done as a referee here in the AWA.
Why wouldn't Vern smarten up the referees?
He didn't smarten me up when I was in the video production truck.
That's true. That's true.
I mean, Vern was old school.
Yeah.
He was kayfabe. He dated kayfabe before kayfabe was even a thing.
Kayfabe?
Yeah.
Chris, I think Vern, in the case,
but it hurts your product, though.
Of course it does.
It hurts your product if you're trying to kayfabe everybody.
I hate to say it, but every once in a while, Vern didn't pay close attention to dotting the I's and crossing the T's. And I think in the case of Lumpkin, he probably said, just stay out of the way. Go in there, let the wrestlers tell you what's going on. Let Sherry and so-and-so lead the match and then count the pin. Well, Gary was a celebrity, and he wanted that spotlight, his 19,000 people or whatever screaming. And it just did not play very well.
Gary's exposure on how to be a referee was watching All-Star Wrestling. I mean, there was no formal training. Celebrity, put on the striped shirt, and you know how to do a match. Just watch a couple of matches on TV. You'll get it.
Oh, I'm a big fan. I can do this.
Exactly.
Yeah. I've got a referee shirt in my closet. Does that mean I can just be a referee?
You could have back in the day. I wouldn't
know.
It would have been more of a Marty Miller than a Scott Ledoux, but
especially sitting in the audience with a mask and shoulder pads on. I think you could have handled that one pretty well.
I could pull that off.
Yeah.
I can pull that off.
Referees, we can't live with them, can't live without them. There you go.
All right, let's give some shout
We've only got 10 seconds to finish out the show, so I'll start counting.
Okay.
Do the referee count. We got 15 minutes.
Yeah, do your first shout out, Mick. We'll let Joe do the counting.
My first shout out goes to our buddy Jeremy Chura. And as we are taping this, Jeremy had a little bit of a health setback. And I shouldn't say a little bit, kind of a serious health setback. And but he's on the mend right now. We love the guy, biggest pain in the ass in the world, but we can't do our stuff without Jeremy. Sure. Hey, slow down the count there, will you, referee? Somebody just rolled in and they broke the count. There you go. Go backwards.
Yes.
Yeah. Perfect.
There you go. Hold on. I'll tag me in. I'll do the counting.
Start over. Go ahead, Joe. Have you got a shout out?
My shout out goes to a top flight or top contributor to our AWA Unleashed fan page, John Ori DuPont. Thank you for all of your posts and helping us all remember the AWA through your memories. Tag in.
There you are. Okay. All right. My shout out is going to go to my friend Glenn Braggett. He and I apparently have crossed paths before, back in 1994 at North Dakota State University at Churchill Hall. So, yeah. So, Glenn, I told you I was going to give you my shout out here, and hey, he was a friend before I even knew him. So, thank you, Glenn. And
hey, Joe, look, a cloud. There you go. Oh my God.
We can't stop till we get to 10. Keep going.